Alright, welcome back. We are still in the options feature for the game. We should be able to wrap this up in this video. So for this video, we are going to add the functionality to our buttons. So I have Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and volume. So I'm going to link these buttons, and to do that, we're going to use the browser object, which we should have in our input folder, the browser object. We use that in menu title. When we quit from the title screen, we wanted to close the entire browser. In our options event sheet, I'm going to create a group. So right click, add a group, call this one open and close options. And then we can slide this entire block of code into there. I'm going to create another group, call this one button links. So in our button links group, let's add an event, go into our input folder, get our touch, and say on tap object, and let's choose Facebook button. Okay, and then we can add an action, go into our input folder and choose our browser. And if we scroll down to navigation, we have go to URL. And I am going to insert my own Facebook URL here. So I'm going to highlight that and insert mine. You want to make sure that you have your entire address in between quotation marks and that the HTTP or HTTPS is at the beginning. And the target is going to be self. I'm going to hit done. Once we tap on the Facebook button, I want to make our options close, just like we do up here. So if we have the options open and then we press on the cogwheel, it'll close it. But if we have the options open and we press on a button, I want to also close it. I'm just going to highlight that and control click drag a copy down here. See how easy functions makes everything? So let's try that. I'm going to make sure we're in our map. I'm going to test that and call the options up. And well, we have a problem. It worked, but it sent us to the right place. It looked like it did it when I clicked on the cogwheel, but actually what was happening was I was clicking on the cogwheel and it was creating the button and counting that click all at the same time. So we need to set up another little system using variables to tell it when it is okay to click on a button and when it is not. So I'm going to go back into our button options over in our project panel, and then in the properties panel I'm going to edit instance variables, and we have that options called that we used up here. And now I'm going to add a new one. I'll call this one options available. We'll leave it as a number. 0 will be false, 1 will be true. In this space down here of this block of code, if we right click and go to add and say another condition, go into our sprites, buttons, pick our options, scroll down to compare instance variable. We are going to change the value to 1 for true. If we touch on the button and our instance variable is set to true, then we can run the code. And then as always, once we perform the action, we want to make sure that we set this variable back to false. So add an action, and let's go find that options button again. And we can scroll down, set the value of options available to 0. And because everything took place so fast when we tested it just a minute ago, I want to put another weight in there. So I'm going to add an action, go to system, weight, and I'm just going to do 0.1, 1/10 of a second. Now, just as we called this function the same way we called it up here, whenever it closes, this variable, options called, gets set back to 0, which would be up here. So down here, we do the same thing. We tap on that Facebook button, we close the options. Well, we also need to set our options called variable back to 0 as well, because we're performing the same action up here. So I'm just going to highlight that, control click and drag it down here. So now, as long as our options available is true, meaning our options have been called, and we tap on the Facebook button, we'll go to the Facebook page. The options will close. They'll animate out. We'll wait 1/10 of a second and then change our variables back. I'm going to go and test that out. And see, it didn't do it that time. I click on it and it has time to animate before it registers me clicking on it. So I'm going to click on the Facebook and I am not getting anything. So let's see what happened. Up here, we didn't tell this variable what to be because it starts out over here in our properties panel. You can see that it is originally 0 at default. So we need to tell it to be 1. So I'm going to add an action up here where we open our options. I'm going to add an action there and go to sprites, buttons, get our options button, scroll down, set the value of options available to 1. So now that's true. And then with that highlighted, we can just control, click, drag a copy, go into it, and change that 1 to a 0. So now we're setting all our variables to where they need to be, and now that should work. Let's hit play and open it, and there we go. We got this channel's Facebook page. All right, exit out of that. I'm going to insert a comment here so we know what's going on. I'm going to go to our, let's say our global variables. I'm just going to highlight any of these. I want to bring over the settings that I have made for these comments, meaning the colors that I've set it at. Highlight one of them, Control C to copy, go back to our options, and then I'm just going to click on this and paste. And that didn't do what I wanted it to do. That's fine. I'm just going to drag it up into the group. So above this block of code, I'm going to say go to Facebook. So now I'm just going to highlight this whole block of code, Control C to copy, Control V to paste, and I'm going to highlight this event right here, R on the keyboard, and we're going to change that Facebook to Twitter. And then we can change our go to Facebook URL. Mine, I'm going to change to my Twitter. Hopefully you understand what we're doing here with the URLs. Whichever icon or name or place you want to send the player when they tap that button, you'll just need to go there to the page you want them to land on and copy that address and paste it in here in between quotation marks. So the rest of this stays the same because we want this to still happen. And then I will highlight the comment and I'm going to drag out a copy. And then I'll double click to go into it and change my Facebook to Twitter. This way we have some comments. It kind of breaks it up and it makes it more readable. So when we want to change any of this, we will be able to find it quite easily. Select that, Control C to copy, Control V to paste. Highlight this R on the keyboard. I'm going to choose YouTube. And then I will change my URL to my YouTube landing page address. I'll drag out another comment here and change Twitter to YouTube. That's it for the links. I'm going to close that one as well. I'm going to create another group and I'm going to call this one Mute and Unmute. Okay. And then I'll add an event, go to Input, Touch, and On Tap Object. And I will select the Volume button. And we are going to do this the same way we did the pause. Let's go over to our global variables. And I'm going to right click and add a global variable. And I'm just going to call this one Mute Volume. And that's going to be a 0, 1. And back on our options, let's add an action, go to System, and I'm going to set the value of mute volume. I want to set the value to 1 no matter what, and then I want to subtract whatever the current value of our mute volume variable. So this is exactly how we set up the pause feature. We take our variable, we make the variable 1, a value of 1 no matter what, then we subtract whatever the value of that variable is at that time. So if it starts out at 0, this would be 1 minus 0 equals 1. So now mute volume is now 1. And then when we press it again, we will set mute volume to 1 minus whatever mute volume is at that time, which we just turned it to 1, so it'll be 1 minus 1 will equal 0. So it'll just keep going back and forth from 1 to 0 each time we press the mute button. And just like in our buttons up here, we want to make sure that our options available is set to true before we can use the functionality of the mute. So I'm just going to double click on this, and I'm going to go to our sprites, buttons, get our options button, scroll down to compare instance variable, and I want to know that options available is true, equal to 1. So now this will only take place as long as our button is visible and our variable is true. Okay, so the same way we did it up here, whenever we choose a button, we want to make sure that we close the options and reset our variable. So now we want to check if our mute is true or not, 1 or 0. So I'm going to right click and say add a sub event. And I'm going to go into our system, compare a variable, and I want to compare mute volume when it is true. So when it is equal to 1, I'm going to want to mute the audio. We haven't done sound yet. That actually begins in the next video. So we won't be able to test this part out, but we can go ahead and put it in because it's pretty self-explanatory how it works. But to get our available audio actions, we have to make sure that we have audio in the game. So if we go over to our object types and in our input folder, I'm going to open that up so we can see it. And I have an extra array. I'm not sure why. If you have an extra array, make sure that there's nothing in it. I'm going to just delete that. You might not have that in there. I might have accidentally put that in there. I'm not sure. So in our input folder, we should have our array, crowns earned, our browser object, and our touch object. So I'm going to right click on the input folder, add a new object type, and I'll scroll down to media and select audio. And that has been added to our input folder. So now we can access some audio actions. So let's add an action. Go into our input folder, go to audio, and we want to go to set master volume. This is going to be the volume of everything we put in this game. We are going to have background music and sound effects. And if we mute, I want everything to be muted. So I'm going to set the master volume, and I'm going to set it to -300. That will make it silent. And then I want to close the options because we have made a selection. So I'm going to highlight this options close function up here, control, click, drag out a copy right below it. And then I also want to set this options available back to 0. So I'm going to come down here, highlight this options available, and click and drag out a copy. All right, and then we can actually highlight this block of code, Control C to copy, Control V to paste. Then we can go into our variable, and we want to check for when it is 0, when it is false. So if we go into set master volume, we can set this to 0. This will set the volume of everything that we put into the game at its original volume. And then we perform the same actions. Something else I want to do with this icon. If we go over here to our icon volume in our buttons folder and double click to open it up, I want this to be different when it is mute and unmute. Come down here and right click on this frame and say duplicate, and then make sure this second frame is highlighted. And I'm going to come up here to the selection box, click that, and I'm going to start over here, and I'm going to draw a box over the little sound waves coming out, and I'm going to hit delete, and that just takes it away. We have volume, we don't have volume. Exit out of that. So up here, when mute volume is true, equals 1, I want to display the muted icon. So we can add an action, go into our sprites, buttons, find our volume icon, and then I want to set the frame to 1. That was the second frame because it starts at 0. So we have 0 and 1. I want frame number 1. And I'm actually going to move that up to right there. And then with that highlighted, control, click, and drag out a copy down here. And then when we change it to false, 0, meaning that it's not muted, then we can change the frame back to frame 0, which was the first one. So it should display that we now have volume. All right, so I'm going to test this. I'll close that up. And let's make sure we have our map layout called up. And let's give it a test. So right away, we see that our icon animation played all the way through because there was just the 2 frames. So it played both of them and it ran right through them. So it still functions, but it's playing through the animation. Okay, if we go into our icon, if we drop our speed, I left it at 5, I didn't mean to, but let's drop that down to 0. That way the animation won't play unless we tell it where to go. So let's exit out of that, and now we can play again. And now you see we have the icon on the first frame. And then if I click it, you saw the animation went to the second frame just like we told it to. But now, without the sound waves, it should show us that it is muted. But what it's doing is it's creating that icon every time. So it's creating a new icon and we're not telling it which frame to start out on. So if we go into our functions and in our creation of the mute button and icon, right here where we put the comment in of volume button, we create the button, then we create the icon, and then we pin the icon to the button. So we can actually tell it what frame to be on right after it creates it each time. But we don't know what frame it's going to be on here in the code. So we can't just say set at frame 0 or set at frame 1. So what we can do is use the mute volume variable. Let's add an action and let's go into our sprites, buttons, and grab our icon volume and pick set frame. And we want to set that frame to that variable. And we'll just start typing in mute volume, hit done, and then let's slide it up into this section right here under volume button. And it'll be the last thing that happens in this section. So we'll create the button, the icon, pin the icon to the button, and then set the animation frame to that variable. Okay, I'm going to close that. I'm going to go back to our map and we'll play it. And we have the frame set to as if we did have volume. So I will mute it. And you saw it change frames there. Now if we go ahead and call it up again, there is our icon on the correct animation frame. That indicates that it's muted. I'll hit it again. And now we have sound. And if I open it back up, it shows that we still have sound. Something else I'm noticing is that I'm not getting a very good response on clicking this cogwheel. And I think I know what the problem is. So let's exit out of this. Let's go into our button options cogwheel here. Double click to open it. And if we go to our collision polygon, you can see it's all over the place. So I am going to right click on any one of these nodes and I'm just going to put it to set to bounding box. So now we have a much broader area to click on. I'll test that one more time. And I'm getting a much better response now. Okay, I just thought of one more thing. If we go into our options event sheet, up here in our open and close, we use the options called variable, and then when we ran the function and opened it, we would set the options called to true, which was 1. And then when we closed it, we would set options called back to 0. Well, the mute is still part of the options, and we still use the options close function, but we never set this options called to 0. So I'm going to highlight the options called variable up here, and I am going to hold Control on the keyboard, click, and drag down a copy. I will just do the same thing with this that we just did. Control, click, drag out another copy. That way, anytime we mute or unmute, it's going to close our options, and we want to make sure that we reset all the variables for the next time that we open the options. I'm going to close that up, and I am going to insert this wheel here on all of the layouts that I want our options to be available on. In fact, I like that position. I'm going to go ahead with this selected. In the properties, I'm going to highlight that, Control C to copy, and then we can go over to our layouts, and we want all 4 of these to have the options cogwheel on them. So call up our menu title, drag out a copy, and that is on the fade layer. I'll unlock that and then select it and move it to the buttons layer. Then we can turn that all back off. And then I'll unlock the buttons layer, select it, highlight this, and Control V to paste those coordinates. Hit enter, and it'll go in the same place. Let's go to menu next. Do the same thing. Drag one out. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to select buttons and unlock it. Learn my lesson. Drag out a copy and highlight the position, paste our coordinates in there. Do that to the retry menu as well. Unlock our buttons, drag out a copy, paste the coordinates. So now all of our menus have our options available on them. One last thing, we added that to all the layouts. Now we need to add it to all of the event sheets. So we already have it on our map event sheet. Let's go to menu next. I'm going to right click and go down to include event sheet. And I want to include our options. And then retry, do the same thing, right click, include event sheet, options, and then the title. All right. Close those up. That should be it for the options feature in this game. This is just one way that you can pull off having options in your game. In the next video, we are going to start adding the audio. So that wraps it up for the options. I'm going to end this video here. I will see you in the next one. And as always, don't forget to save.